Welcome back, I'm Kimberly, and this is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series, where we use our AI, DesignEye, to look at a couple of designs and tell us its analysis based on the principles and elements of design, which is how we are judged when we are competing with our floral art designs, and also its suggestions for some changes that we might make to a design. And it's all part of our education journey in floral art so that we can review designs that we do, look at other designs and see what it is that would make it a bit better of a design, so lift it up from the level that it might always have been at. And I will say that for all of these designs you can have a look at the construction notes that I've put together and the physical judges' comments and how they went, how they fared in their competitions, their various competitions, and all of those are on the website. There's over 250 designs. I add to it every week with designs that I've done and how they were put together, what my thinking was, what the results were, and then over time we'll put them through DesignEye and see what another independent analysis gives us. This week our designs are Contrast of Nature, which is a wall hanging, but it was displayed on an easel for judging, and Distinctly Different, which as you can see is a bench design, and I think I nailed the distinctly different part of that particular interpretation. But let's now have a look at the first one, Contrast of Nature. This, as I said, was a wall hanging. It was displayed on an easel. It does have very set dimensions of what we have to do in terms of the presentation of the wall hanging, and the background, the canvas that I had to use was not quite the right size, and so one of the things I've done is extended the plant material past the framing itself to try and incorporate a bit of negative space above the bulk of the design so that it is a bit closer to using up 2/3 of the space that was allowed for this design. The basis of it, as I said, is a painting canvas, because that comes closest to the background and the sizing that I wanted, because the metal, the black part of it, is basically an outdoor candle holder. So it has candle cups that I've covered up with some of the plant material, and I've put it on its side. Normally it would be placed horizontal if you were putting it on a wall outdoors, but I've put it vertically to try and give it a little bit more dimension. And I've used, as you can see, wood slices and some smaller plant material. The background of the frame, I have used the squares and the shapes in it to place some contrasting plant-based material. So I've got some bark and some sisal and some tillandsia and other things there, just to emphasise the contrast that we want in the design. So we want, in terms of contrast of nature, we want rough and smooth, shiny and flat surfaces or matte surfaces, prickly and fluffy, and all of the things that might be contrasts juxtaposed so that the contrasts are highlighted. So let's see what DesignEye has got to say about this design. Looking first of all at line, the design incorporates both organic and geometric lines, so that will give me a contrast to start with. The natural branches and leaves create flowing organic lines, while the grid-like structure and wooden pieces introduce strong geometric lines. This juxtaposition adds visual interest and adds a sense of dynamic tension. For shape, the composition features a variety of shapes, including the rectangular pieces, the circular wood slices, and the irregular shapes of the leaves and flowers, which is a contrast, but in this case it's talking about the diversity. So this diversity creates a visually stimulating and engaging experience. So in terms of shape, not, to my mind, now that I look at it, not quite enough contrast or obvious contrast in the shapes. For texture, the design showcases a rich tapestry of textures. The rough bark, the smooth wooden surfaces, the delicate petals and the feathery foliage all contribute to a tactile and sensory experience. So in that sense I've got some contrast there in terms of texture. The colour palette is predominantly earthy and natural, with browns, greens and yellows being the most predominant hues. This creates a sense of warmth and harmony with nature. The red and pink accents provide subtle pops of colour that draw the eye and add a touch of vibrancy. So in terms of, in texture, as we looked at, there is contrast, but colour, there's probably not as much contrast, and that might be something that it suggests that we do to create a bit more of a contrast, look at the colour contrast as well as the texture. Balance. The heavier visual weight on the right side due to the concentration of elements is counterbalanced by the strong lines and upward movement of the branches on the left. So that's an interesting comment, because in anything where you've got very strong geometric lines and a very regulated shape, and then you put a lot of visual weight on one side, it is very hard to balance it. But what it's saying here is that the strong lines and the upward movement of those branches that extend beyond the canvas are balancing it out visually for us. For emphasis, the red rose serves as the focal point of the design, its vibrant colour and placement drawing the viewer's attention. The smaller flowers act as a secondary focal point, echoing the circular shape of the wood slices and adding a playful touch. Now, when I first read this analysis, I thought, where is the red rose? Because it wasn't the focal point of the design for me. I would have said that it was interest equated. There isn't one single point of emergence, so I'm not necessarily drawn to the red rose. I'm actually drawn more to the pinks, the sisal that I've used in some of the background areas there, but that's just my eye. And all it does is emphasise that as judges we look at things a little bit differently, so you're always going to get a little bit different interpretation, but it's always good to hear what a judge has got to say so you can see it from their eyes as well as the way you thought it was going to turn out. Unity. Despite the diverse elements, the design maintains a sense of unity through the repetition of shapes, colours and textures. The grid-like structure acts as a unifying element, tying together the disparate components into a cohesive whole, and that's good because that's what I had hoped as the outcome of using that particular framework for this design. Now we look at the suggestions for improvement from DesignEye. Negative space. While the design is visually rich, introducing more negative space could enhance the impact of the individual elements and prevent the composition from feeling overcrowded. So I've got a little bit of negative space at the top, but because behind where the design's stage is an open window, you don't get the same sort of effect as you would if it was a wall background, if it was a plain wall background where this had been displayed. If it had been, in fact, on a wall as a wall hanging, the negative space element might have been a little bit different, but it is very solid between the white of the background canvas and the metallic frame, which is completely filled in. So perhaps leaving a few more blanks might have been better in looking at using the negative space. Depth. The wall hanging could benefit from incorporating elements that create a sense of depth and dimension. This could involve layering materials using shadow boxes or adding elements that project outward from the surface. Now that's probably a reflection of the fact that the image doesn't give you an indication that it did have some depth, because some of those timber placements are placed at 90 degrees to the background, and so that gives it depth, but take it on board anyway. And interesting with the lighting, lighting is something that we often can't change in terms of our competition designs when it's a physical design, but it is something that you can look at if you're doing an online design. So one of the designs for our competitions is to think about the lighting. So experimenting with different lighting techniques could enhance the visual appeal of the design. For example, backlighting or spotlighting could highlight specific elements and create dramatic shadows. And one of the things that might have helped with is the depth of the design. Had I had the light coming from above and from the side, you would have got shadows, or you would have been able to see that there was some depth in those placements. So in summary, overall contrast of nature is a well-executed floral design that skillfully blends natural and man-made elements. By incorporating the suggested improvements, the design could be further elevated, creating an even more captivating and evocative piece. So once again, as we have found with all of our DesignEye analyses, we've got some things to think about. We've had an opinion based on the principles and elements of our design that will help us think a little bit more broadly. And once we're out of the competition mode, it's a good time to review and to extend your thinking and get ready for the next one. So now let's look at our second design, which is, as you would have seen at the beginning, distinctly different. Distinctly different. Well, you'd have to agree that the presented design certainly is that. and I had a very clear mindset for this particular competition. I, as you might be surprised to hear, have developed a bit of a reputation for pushing the edge of the judging, and I thought this time around I would really be able to do that given the title of the class. So what I've got here is the base, the support base is a metal weight from a telescope, in fact, but it's a great heavy base, and it's on a little bit of cork on the base so that the design, the plant material element, carries through to the base of the design. And mounted on that is a piece of timber that is weathered wood, classified as weathered wood rather than driftwood, because I didn't actually find it on the beach, so it's not driftwood, it is weathered wood. So it's a fallen piece of timber. It's got a wonderful pattern across the outside of it that is, if you look closely at the image, you'll be able to see in the top of that I've drilled 5 holes, put some paper covered wire, some strong wire, and then just threaded at different levels some wood slices and angled the wire so that I've got a little bit of a curl in each of them in different directions to give it depth as well as to give it some movement. So let us see what DesignEye has got to say about this particular design. So I like, first of all, its overall impression. The first impression is that it's an intriguing piece that showcases a minimalist yet impactful approach to floral design, and that's exactly what I was hoping to achieve with the design. Let's look at line first of all. The design primarily utilises strong organic lines created by the branches or the wires extending from the central wooden structure. These lines create a sense of movement and dynamism, which you heard is what I wanted, drawing the viewer's eye outward from the centre. The thin wires connecting the wooden discs add a delicate touch and further enhance the sense of movement. Form. The overall form is asymmetrical and abstract, with the focus on the graceful curves and the circular discs. The wooden structure itself is a solid organic form that anchors the design. So I don't know that this was particularly classified as having to be an abstract design, but I'm quite happy that it has been assessed that way. Texture. The design features a contrast between the rough textured surface of the wood and the smooth polished surfaces of the discs. This contrast adds visual interest and a tactile dimension to the piece. It's interesting that the texture creates a sense of tactile dimension within a design, something that we probably should be keeping in mind when we're looking at contrasts, because we want to have some sort of contrast in every design that we do. Colour. The colour palette is limited to the natural tones of the wood and the discs. This simplicity allows the focus to remain on the form and the line of the design. So if you've looked at any of the other videos, you'll see that often we talk about a colour palette being limited so that it does put the focus on some of the other principles and elements of design. So you need to know that you're getting, if you're going to use a limited colour palette, that you've got the other things right, because their focus will be on the form and the line and the texture to some extent. So if you're going to limit one element of your design or one principle, then you need to know that you've got all of the others exactly how you think they should be in terms of judging. So balance. The design achieves a sense of balance through its asymmetry. The heavier visual weight on the right side, where the branches and discs extend outward, is counterbalanced by the strong vertical line of the wooden structure. In looking at this design in review, now it's a couple of years since I did the design, I am quite concerned about the balance. I think the visual balance of that piece of timber is quite overpowering, but the judge and DesignEye, our AI judge, hasn't seen it that way, sees that it's balanced. So proportion. The proportions of the design are well considered. The size of the discs relative to the branch and the overall size of the structure create a sense of harmony and visual appeal. And once again, I am concerned about the proportions in this design. And I think it's because the visual balance for me of that piece of timber is making me feel like the proportions of the discs are not right. So I would like them to be marginally bigger to balance out visually that dominance of the timber on the timber support. So emphasis. The focal point of the design is the cluster of discs on the right side. Their contrasting colour and placement make them stand out from the rest of the composition. And that's probably true, because it would appear that all of those elements of the design come from the one point. So it's a radial design in that sense, that there is one point of emergence for the rest of the design from the support material. The emphasis should be on that side, but as I said earlier, the visual dominance of that piece of timber is worrying me and making me feel like that's where my eye is drawn, and so that's the emphasis. So I don't agree with AI on this occasion, as I probably wouldn't agree with judges sometimes. Unity, the design achieves a sense of unity through the repetition of the shape, circular discs and curved branches, and the consistent use of material. So it's good that it feels like a unified design. It doesn't feel like two halves in that sense, which could be the case. Had I used different colours, that might have been the case. There might have been a sense of two halves of design. Once again, because of the dominance of that piece of wood, the support wood. So our suggestions for improvement now. Colour. While the current colour palette is effective in its simplicity, introducing subtle hints of colour could add another layer of interest to the design. For instance, the disc could be stained with a natural dye to create a subtle contrast with the wood. Now that's an interesting observation, because in fact I could have taken that on. I could have used a little bit of dye and perhaps emphasise the fact that the wood was distinctly different in that it was coloured, but then you run the risk of how much you're allowed in a competition to have painted or altered material or manipulated material, and so you'd have to check the schedule to see what that might be if you decided to use that as an improvement. So, and in movement, while the design already has a sense of movement, this could be enhanced by incorporating elements that move with the air currents. For example, hanging the discs on longer wires will allow them to sway gently, adding a dynamic element to the piece. And I really like that suggestion. I think that would be a great suggestion. I wouldn't have them all moving, but I might have one or two that came out, once again, from that single point of emergence, but had them as free floating, and so actually moving, and it would enhance the idea of the movement from the other curved branches. So I quite like that design, or that suggestion, and I would take that on board when I was redoing this particular design. And of course we have a summary here that just says, overall distinctly different is a successful floral design that showcases a unique and artistic approach. That's me all over, unique. By incorporating the suggested improvements, the design could be further elevated, creating an even more captivating and visually stimulating piece. So there we have our two designs for this week, our wall hanging Contrast of Nature and Distinctly Different, which was staged on the bench. As always, I would encourage you to submit your own designs and have them analysed by DesignEye. It really is helpful in terms of reviewing your designs and of continuing on your education and journey in floral art. But for now, I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Online, Designs Dissected.